I'm here today with Brad Lukanic, who is the CEO of CannonDesign, one of the world's largest design firms, which he's led for 8 years. Brad, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Will. It's good to be here. And when you say 8 years, it's funny. It seems like yesterday or it seems like an eternity, depending on what day of the week you ask me. And it's a Monday, so it seems like an eternity.
Well, especially on this Monday, I feel, I don't know, this will air pretty close to when we're recording it, but just for context, because I'm sure they'll be listening to this for years to come, and this is right in the middle of I don't know what would you call this? The start of a trade war, the middle of a trade war, it's certainly not the end of a
The
trade war.
start of a trade war, the start of a strategic recession. I mean, different people have called it different things. It is a start of a different
Strategic
moment.
recession. That's an interesting.
Yes.
I haven't heard that one. Okay, yeah, that sounds possibly like a good way to describe this. So, on other topics, let's start right at the beginning. How would you describe CannonDesign?
So I think what's interesting about CannonDesign is it's a architecture and engineering firm that is 100 years in the making. And I think it's at a pivotal moment where we're trying to think about what the future is to basically make a design firm that lasts for another 100. And the way one might have done business in those previous years to way does tomorrow is, I think, an inflection point, not just for a design industry, but for any business out there with all the changes that are coming to the external landscape. I mean, you can use the word AI or intelligence thinking and machine automation, but there is a inflection point that I think we're trying to not react to, but hopefully lead a little bit.
Let's put some context to it around CannonDesign. Like, what kinds of projects might you guys take on?
Yeah. So most of the work that we have done falls into institutional type of work or a commercial setting. And institutional being defined as healthcare. What is the future of hospitals,
Mm.
education, both K through 12 and a lot of higher ed? And what is the future of universities types of spaces? Like what's the future of libraries look like? And then science and tech, and with all the advancements in science and tech and research and development, how will lab planning change? Those are some examples. And then we underpin it with trying to do a foundation in sustainable architecture through it all.
So, talk about sustainable for a moment. So, I feel
Yeah.
like that has to be one of the things that has been changing, we've kind of been moving towards. What would you say about that? How does sustainability play in right now to this industry?
Well, I think there's a couple of different buckets into sustainability. Bucket number one is how much energy does a building consume? And is that the right amount of energy, and where does the energy source from, and all parts of that? We spend a lot of time thinking about that, thinking about electrification, thinking about fossilized fuels, and thinking about how buildings of the future need to perform because they're big investments. So that's one part.
Mhm.
Second part of sustainability is really about the materials that are in the buildings and how it creates a healthy environment for humans and individuals, and how they can interact with it. And so we spend a lot of time balancing those two things. And then the third part of it is really about how does the building perform and act? And that's really about using incorporating technology as smart building technology into trying to think about maximizing the relationship between the human occupant and how the building is going to adjust its climate settings for you throughout the day.
Yeah, and I heard that did you recently complete an acquisition?
Today, we just announced the addition of a group of a smart buildings group and technology group called the Clariant Group. And that was a key thing that we did to really expand our offerings. It's a complement to some of the things that we've been doing, but it rapidly accelerates into the smart building and automation and technology side.
So this would be a strategic acquisition in that case,
Yeah,
rather than just a
absolutely.
financial acquisition.
Yeah, and some of them are geographic. This was part of a strategic framework. We think about a 5 year windows at a time, and this was part of our goal to push into this boundary. And yeah, we very much think of it about it as a strategic acquisition.
So, if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about kind of what motivates the firm from a financial perspective. Do you have
Yep.
investors? Are you publicly traded? What's the or is it uh, some other structure? How do you
So,
guys
no,
operate?
yeah. So we're a little old school. We are 100% employee owned. And we don't have outside private equity or family fund investment, and
Wow.
we are not publicly traded. It was very interesting. We have a employee owned mindset, but it's actually with a diverse set of ownership. No one owns more than 2% of the company. And we have about a third of our owners or a third of our employees that are actually owners within the company. So it is meant to think about not only as a design excellence exploration, but also how to build value as an owner in a company. So it's a journey that we're on.
That's really fascinating. I hear, I encounter that every now and then. I wouldn't say it's the most common scenario, but it sounds the best, in a lot of ways. I mean, like when you hear it, you think, wow, that's the way it should be. That's great. How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I think it is the way it should be. I wish I could say that I joined back when I did a decade and a half ago because of it. I discovered it along the way. And I think in the time when I joined the firm, I probably was naive about what it meant to own something and the question about building value and having a stake in the company. What I've really enjoyed over time is understanding that there is a destiny or there is a authority of decision making that we hope for by having owners to make really great decisions. And I think the company, in some ways, has benefited from that model. I think there's a lot of good different models out there. It works really well for us, and we take pride in the world of professional services, seeking a lot of outside investment that we have not done that yet, and that we've invested a good amount of our profits into R&D ourselves.
So how does it work at the kind of basic level? You just completed an acquisition of another company. How does that kind of decision gets made? Is there a vote of employee shareholders? Is it
Yep.
all driven at the executive level? How does that work for people that aren't familiar with this kind of model?
Yeah. So in our model, we start with the idea, and we started with the idea of a strategic framework. And the strategic framework was really about a roadmap of the firm that we aspire to be. And it's in every 5 year kind of cycle. And in that, we actually reached out to about six or 700 of the employees to outline a roadmap for the future. In that, it doesn't say we want to acquire firm X, Y, or Z, but it outlines some of our ambitions in the future. And so as we look towards things, we use that as our litmus test because that was kind of the voices of the firm. As we do acquisitions, it's really initiated by the management, which we call the core team, the kind of nucleus of how we try and think about making quick and swift decisions, which is important in this business and this day and age. And then we have a board of directors, which is employees and owners of the firm. It's all an internal board, and they are informed along the way, and they vote for the acquisition, but usually as long as it's within the strategic framework, it's a very positive and swift process. The only time that we would actually go to shareholders is actually if there was a sale of the company or to take outside investment or something like that. But the rest of the time is that the shareholders have designated the board as the group that actually works with the management.
So, one thing I really like about your background, as I understand it, is that you're an architect yourself. So, as I understand that, you're a practitioner. That's how you came up, and you moved into management. You moved into executive leadership. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an architect licensed in multiple states and have spent my career. First, my dad was a contractor, so I grew up many a days in the summer working on construction sites with my dad, learning at how things were assembled. I took that into actually doing work in higher ed, everywhere from academic libraries and student unions to performing arts, and really assembling complex buildings. And then In the summer of 2016, the board of directors, our CEO had announced that he was stepping away, and the board of directors asked if I would consider interviewing. It was not on the bingo card. Anybody that always says that they want to be CEO or be in a leadership, for me, it's always been a place where you run with the smartest minds, whatever you're doing to challenge yourself to make something bigger. So when the board asked, I accepted an interview and outlined something and that I think was a roadmap for our future. And here we are many years later, and it's a lot of fun. Some not all days, but most days.
I understand that. I understand that. I also took the same route. I was a practitioner and I started my company, but I started it as essentially a consultant, and then I grew to the point where I had to be an actual CEO in charge of staff and other things. And so, what were some of the challenges with moving from practitioner to manager in that sense when you did that 8 years ago?
I think that the biggest challenge is the time that you can afford yourself to spend on internal things that are important, but may not be the best use of your time. And I think about the early days of the leadership was how to be accessible to all the needs that were within the organization, but also be out there as the face listening to trends out there in the industry, signals out in the industry, and not losing sight that part of the job and the main part of the job is to really figure out how to chart a path forward and to actually have a vision. And that requires balance. And I think probably in the earlier days, understanding the balance topic was probably something I could have thought about more had I known. You probably know this story.
I do, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember how somebody else phrased it, but basically, there is this moment where you have to go from, from doing kind of the client work and the client services work itself to doing things that are much more abstract, and it's that transition that a lot of people struggle to make because the abstract things that a CEO often has to do not translate into instant revenue or instant, the instant bottom line, but they're critical for the
Yep.
future growth of the company.
Yep. I go to a series of conferences every year, not for marketing, not for networking, but to just absorb like a sponge about what signals are out there. And it's always a good moment in time to put things into perspective that the first job first is to understand where the landscape is going and how to assemble, a really smart group of people around you to execute on that.
Do you spend any particular percentage of your time doing the architecture work or working with clients, or do you focus 100% on management at this point?
Where I spend most of my time is on meeting with firms on the acquisition front. I'm
Mm.
also pretty active involved in a board called the Innovation Design Consortium, which is a group of architectural firms focused on trying to push the future of the industry to forward together. So I spend more time with that. I've actually surprisingly extracted myself from day-to-day client work because there's really capable people around me that have picked that up. And except on a rare instance, I was actually able to step away from a good part of that, which I tremendously miss. But when you're talking to other firms, either through the design consortium or through a merger and acquisition, you feel really connected to the work and what the purpose of what people are trying to do. And honestly, when you talk to another firm about their value of what they're trying to do, you know instantly, yeah, these align with our values.
Yeah. So you've mentioned acquisitions a couple of times. How do you is growth through acquisition a key part of the strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, when we outlined our firm from both a strategic framework, we had a valuation framework that kind of talked about how we wanted to build value. And as you know, there's financial value and qualitative value in terms of how you grow your brand. And more than anyone else about the importance of building value in your brand. So part of it is an organic growth in what we know, but it's also understanding that there's really great people out there in the industry launching some new companies that are connected with and part of the design industry. And in other cases, they're geographic, so in areas that we want to be. One of the acquisitions that we did a few years ago was a consulting group called Blue Cottage of CannonDesign, which is, in our view, one of the leading forefront bleeding edge firms to help the C-suite think through really big problems that may or may not result in architecture through what is the future of healthcare, what is the future of education. That changed the game for us by them joining us. And I think those are the moments in time where you scale faster than if you tried to build it yourself. And those are the types of things that we try and build through acquisition.
I've also heard of the phrase living centered design. What does
Yep.
that mean?
So you will find in a lot of design firms out there that there's very much focused on the human element, human-centric design, or human ethos or things like that. When we did a reflection on our firm and what we valued, one of the things that became apparent was the interconnectivity of people and engagement of a variety and a diverse types of groups within the built environment. And for us, a human-centered design is about how an individual interacts with a space. Living-centered design is about the ecosystem of how many different people, many different backgrounds, the diverse thinking interact and make something better. And so for us, it's about being socially responsible, thinking about being good stewards of the environment, and then creating this kind of safe, creative environment for this ethos of people.
So I've got a question out of left field for you. So you remember in the news a couple weeks ago, I think every single federal building was put up for sale for me.
Yes.
What did you think when you saw that?
Ah, and I think there's the website with the links to all the buildings have been taken down, but the
Okay.
concept is still there. Here's what I think. I think buildings and architecture have its place to tell a story about a cultural heritage of a place. Perhaps through the GSA, which was managing the program, certain buildings could have their leases ended and it would not be material. But I think some of the buildings on that list were very much about our cultural heritage, about who we are, and tell an important story. And while they may need to be modernized or updated, I do think that architecture tells a story that is important to who we are as a society. And I was actually quite um, at first disappointed just to see some of the names
Yeah.
on that list. I'm hopeful that what is out there as a first volley may be different than the future.
Yeah, I agree with that completely about architecture telling a story and some of these buildings being very, very important to our history. I grew up in the DC area, so I know that every federal building is certainly not a notable building
Yes.
necessarily. Some of them, could probably pass for a Soviet style, kind of just schoolhouse type thing. But many of the buildings are beautiful. And so would your firm be involved in modernizing existing buildings
Yep.
as opposed to just building, not just, but as opposed to building from scratch?
Yeah, our firm has actually had a legacy in actually tackling some notable historic projects. There was a law school that we did, a law school library, a Saarinen library, and others that we've done that are mid-century moderns. I think those buildings are of a place and of its time, and there's certain ones that have cultural importance. We've also in the past done work for the GSA on rehabilitating federal buildings and have taken great pride and bringing them up to contemporary energy standards that are in line with our, kind of values around sustainability.
Do you think that there are buildings that, are not going to be possible to modernize at this point, just because, we've made so many advances with sustainability, but wouldn't be able to integrate those types of things into these older buildings.
Yes, and I think that that is part of the conversation, the evaluation. And I think that's the big thing is you need to evaluate the likelihood of what the purpose is going in the future and the value of that structure as it is today. I mean, if you took to an extreme level, and it's different than you're asking, but look at parking garages. How many parking garages can be modernized in the world of driverless or automated cars if we ever get there? Not all parking garages will be, but there will be certain ones that'll have cultural significance. Certain ones may have a floor to floor height that they could be tasked into a different type of building design,
Oh,
you know.
interesting.
And I think you need to think about um, where they are and their value and yeah, there's a
I,
big conversation.
I didn't even think of that. So basically, you wouldn't need to have ceiling heights where they are today if people aren't walking into them. They would just be driverless, and so
Right.
you could fit far more cars into the average parking garage.
Totally. You can just drop off your car at the curbside and it'll go self-park and you don't need the 10-foot floor to floor. And all the parking garages that we built for decades may yield itself to another opportunity for a different transformation. So,
So how do you design in a world with such rapid innovation? Because for all we know, because you might be designing a parking garage for all I know right now, and that technology might be one day away for all we know.
yeah,
It
I
really, at some point it's going to be here, and I would imagine sooner rather than later. So how do you build in a way that takes that into account? Because
I
you
think
don't want to
that
be obsolete instantly.
right. And the world of obsolescence, as we know, is right around the corner at any given time. I mean, look at back in 2007 when the iPhone came on board and what it did to the BlackBerry and other things, which were leading devices that were in some ways a blink of an eye obsolete. I think that's the challenge of the design professional. That's the challenge of many creators out there in the world is how do you discern what is at a rapid rate of change, what is at accelerated rate of change, and what is slow to change. I think in general, um, certain typologies of projects are slow to the rate of change because of an underlying foundation, whether it's within higher education and the idea of a 4-year degree and yielding to whether it's workforce development. There's a lot of things that you have to understand about how content is delivered. Now, within the state of medicine, the amount of information that doctors need to learn is rapidly changing every 4 to 6 years. And so how to be at the leading edge of that in a different type of market, than other things that we do is part of the dilemma. I wish I had a simple answer for you, but it usually comes as a close collaboration with the client and really how visionary the leadership of that institution is and wants to be, because it often takes a vision and a bold statement by someone saying we're going to play destination Y, and then the rate of change is hypersonic.
So, I want to talk about AI for a moment. So do you use AI just out of curiosity in your day-to-day work? And I don't mean as a company, but like you personally in your office, do you use AI for anything kind of on a regular basis?
I do. I mean, in the most of the simplest form, it's, the co-pilot where it's finishing the sentences, you're typing the email, or, doing very quick searches and things like that. So I would say most of it is to augment or to do something in a much quicker way. The firm itself is really getting into understanding generative AI. There's a whole series of IP topics around generative AI, but we're thinking about that. We're also thinking about how other industry partners are going to use it, whether it's the contractors to actually build on our buildings, whether it's code officials to do code reviews. So we're trying to think about it on multifaceted. I believe that AI will be a radical transformation, but I also believe that the rate at which people perceive change to be is often faster than the rate of changes is. And so the initial, exponential curve that people think with AI is probably going to be a little more of a linear curve
Yeah.
as we sort through it. Just like we all thought that driverless cars were going to be here much quicker in every environment until we actually had them start driving in snow and realize that they're not the best in snow without lanes.
Yeah. Yeah. And now what about your team and your staff? And I'll just tell you, so for my company, when AI first really kind of became widely available, I think there was a bit of I don't know if I'd use the word stigma, but there was maybe some embarrassment if you were to use AI to do some of your work. And in the very first days, I don't know that we had a policy on it, but very quickly what I started doing and what I continue to try to do is encourage people to use it and to be transparent about it. And because I think it require, we need to understand, you know, I don't want it to replace creative work and human work, but I do want it to supplement and to be a part of it. So I've tried to kind of break down that. Again, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a stigma because I don't think it's exactly a stigma, but I'm trying to bring it into the open so that people are not embarrassed to use it, and they're also sharing their experiences. Like, it worked really well for this prompt, it worked pretty poorly for this prompt, and then everybody can kind of grow together with it. How have you had any comparable experiences? Any company-wide kind of policies?
Yes. Yes. And I think that what you just hinted at was this level of discernment of understanding good AI output from marginal AI output.
Mhm.
I think the art of craft, whether it's your business or our business, the art of craft comes from a general understanding of basics, of foundational understanding of, like, let's just say how color goes together and what colors work well together, what fonts or graphics work well together. To do that, you really have to have knowledge in something. And I think the challenge with the early AI is people would go full throttle with it, expecting the output without actually understanding an outcome that was desired that AI could augment. And I think that that's where we are as the inflection. The initial halo benefit of, like, "Ooh, this is really cool," has worn off, and that it has to get driven really in lockstep with the advancement of the individual's knowledge using it. I think you see that in college. That's how professors are able to identify AI so quickly as a paper writer versus a source augmenter in colleges.
Yeah. Um, so I saw that CannonDesign is recognized as one of the best places to work for innovators, for being innovative in general. Um, Everybody says they want to be innovative. Every CEO is going to say that, but there are trade-offs, right? I mean, there's going to be, there's risk that comes with innovation. Not every innovation is going to work. And that's kind of where you start to see, do people really care about innovation, or do they care about having a low tolerance for risk or some other factor? How do you fall in this? It seems like you've created a culture that does encourage innovation.
Yeah.
How would you speak to that?
So I think, there's words that you and I both know that are long in the tooth for being on the edge of overused. Strategic is one of them. Innovation is one of them. So I take innovation with a grain of salt. I think what I would say to that is we try and actually make sure there's a culture that people have an entrepreneurial spirit, and that there is not a top down, this is how we should do it because this is how we've done it. And we've tried to unleash some energy in people through a couple of things that we've done. One is an in-house incubator. So we have something called AMP, which means that an idea can come from anyone. One of the greatest surprises was last year, a group of our team actually wrote and illustrated a children's book on a young girl's journey wanting to become an architect so that it could go out to the profession, to elementary schools or high schoolers to build the profession. We didn't say go write a book because this will be a great idea, but people felt this energy that they could do something. And honestly, it came back and I couldn't have come up with it if I tried. I mean, to me, in some ways, that's the entrepreneurial spirit that we seek to do. And by its nature, might be considered innovative because it's meant to build a pipeline to the profession. But if you're seeking to be innovative, but without an entrepreneurial spirit, then it's just words that you and I know are often too used,
Yeah.
often, poorly.
I think that's well said. Okay, so I've got one other question. This is another one probably out of left field here, but I've got to ask because I can't take my eyes away from the news these days. And so how has, I mean, we're now, I don't know how many days in, 60 days or so into the Trump administration. Um, he's created a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chaos. We mentioned the buildings being listed for sale one moment, they're not for sale the next moment. Lots of people losing jobs. How has this affected your business?
So, um, to be determined, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, the initial effect, and the long-term outcome may not be congruent. I think what we're starting to see is clients take pause with a moment of uncertainty and just to say, there's a great need for project X or project Y, but we've got to wait this out, whether it's the cost of
Mhm.
materials through the tariffs or whether it's the changes in research funding. So we're starting to see this moment of inflection where we might go into what I've heard termed as the strategic recession, or we might not. And I think I am cautious and trying to wade through it. Obviously, with any period of uncertainty, both clients are looking to us for breadcrumbs and our people within the firm are looking to us for breadcrumbs. I don't have a lot because there's not a lot of precedent for the times that we are in, but it is turbulent, just like the stock market at the time of this recording.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing that's becoming clear to me, and I agree with all of that. I mean, I also don't have, I wish I had more insight, but I think it's becoming clear that there are real costs that are now hitting because of the turbulence, because of the uncertainty, and obviously the stock market could rebound and that I mean it goes up and down and whatnot, but there are real costs because, as you said, the tariffs are making people question whether they want to make purchases. It's making people take projects that are valid that they certainly want to do, but they've got to put them on hold temporarily. So really, we're at a moment where um, I guess we would think the pressure would be on for the White House to get something for all this because the costs are now becoming real. And so if they don't get something out of this, then I guess it would be a waste. But I don't have a crystal ball, so we'll see.
Yeah. And I think for us, we have just tried to follow at least the premise of our living center design as a destination of where we're going. By that extension, it means inclusivity and belonging and our commitment to programs that foster
Yeah.
unique perspectives and different perspectives to basically have the minds ready for whichever direction it goes. I think um, there's a lot you can read about. The question is what data points are sound as directional data points or what part is a narrative? I think there is um, one question is how does this play and overlay to the topic that you said earlier is with all the changes in workflows and development of AI and then the traditional ideas of manufacturing and then the idea of automation, can you actually find a path from a business point of view to understand where the landscape will be in 5 to 7 years? Understanding there's now three more things at play than were 6 months ago in terms of all of these topics. And that's where I try and
Yeah.
go to a lot of different things to get perspective because I don't have the answer yet. But when I do, you'll have me back and then
That's right.
We'll see.
So, Brad, what advice would you give to aspiring CEOs at this point? There are people that watch that are students. There are people that watch that are mid-career. They wouldn't mind having your job someday. What would you say as advice?
Okay. Advice is about worth about a nickel these days, so take it with a grain of salt. I think the perspective that I offer is that if you're asked to serve, and you have to understand that this is a service-based position, and that in a servant-based leadership for your people, you need to have conviction in what you're doing and a value system that you believe represents the underlying foundation of the company that you're at. Um, I think what I would say is don't spend too long trying to get acclimated to what the job is that you think it is. Trust your gut, move swiftly, but move methodically, and try and understand that time is never on your side, in a rapidly changing environment.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us on Road to CEO. This has been a great show. Were there any topics we didn't cover that you wanted to touch on?
No, I mean, I think that we covered a lot in a very short amount of time, so I'm feeling pretty good about the cadence and the flow. So I appreciate
Good.
you having me, Will.
Well, I really enjoyed learning about Canon Design and getting to know you here. Yeah, as things develop, I'd love to have you back on.
That sounds great.